Election integrity. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill consider a reform bill, while critics say it's designed to help Democrats. Attack in Iraq. Violence erupts in the country just 2 days before a visit from the Holy Father. And seeking forgiveness, why Pope Francis says confession is a way to pass from misery to mercy. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. At least 10 rockets targeted a military base in western Iraq just 2 days before the Pope's visit. The attack site was near U.S.-led coalition troops. A Pentagon spokesperson says a contractor died after suffering a cardiac episode while sheltering. No one has claimed responsibility for that attack, but Iraqi military security forces have found the launch pad used for the missiles. Joining us now is EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn, and he leaves for Iraq with the Pope on Friday. Colm, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us, will the Pope be traveling anywhere near where these rockets hit?
Tracy, no, he won't, but this is still very worrying with the papal visit only 2 days away. Now, the rockets hit this morning around 7 a.m. in the Anbar province of Iraq, which is about a 4-hour drive from Baghdad, Iraq's capital, and where the Pope will be landing on Friday. Today's attack was the first one since the U.S. struck Iranian militia targets along the Iraq-Syrian border last week. That killed one militiaman. And remember, Tracy, there was a rocket attack outside Erbil airport 2 weeks ago and a double suicide bombing in Baghdad in January. So this raises concern that these back and forth attacks will continue and could escalate.
As far as security, Colm, what does it look like leading up to the Holy Father's trip?
Not many details about the security have been released, Tracy. Iraq will be overseeing security, presumably by their military, but it has been suggested by numerous sources that perhaps they will be receiving assistance from other nations. Now, remember, a papal visit is similar to a presidential visit to the country, and security operations are both extremely complicated to arrange and extremely expensive to implement. Internally, it will be Iraqi Airways who will be transferring the Pope and us journalists to and from various cities by both plane and helicopter. And it is believed that the famous Pope-mobile with the bulletproof glass, that will not be used on this trip, but instead the Pope will be travelling in a closed armoured vehicle with a heavy escort when travelling by road.
And Colm, what about the Iraqi Christians? How are they preparing for the visit?
The finishing touches are being put in place ahead of the visit. Officials have improved the roads and the streetlights, and they've set up crowd control barriers. Stadiums are being repainted and flags are going up everywhere. Now, volunteers in Correspondent, where the Pope will spend his last night, they've been cleaning the Church of the Immaculate Conception, which was greatly damaged in the 2014 ISIS attacks. The city of Correspondent is located in the Nineveh Plains, which is the heartland of Iraqi Christians. Christian communities in other parts of Iraq where the Pope will not be visiting, they're getting ready as well. In the nearby city of Bartella, some deacons were recently ordained, and many young boys have also joined to serve as altar boys. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for Christians in Iraq and the people of Iraq in general to see the Pope in their country, if not in person, then at least on TV. And after all the suffering they've lived through, the Christians and the people of Iraq say that hosting the Holy Father in their home is one of their greatest joys.
Yeah, indeed. And quickly, before I let you go, did the Holy Father mention the trip during his weekly talk today at the Vatican?
He did, Tracy. The Holy Father said that he wanted to visit Iraq for such a long time, and he recalled that the Iraqi people are waiting as they waited for St. John Paul II, who was unable to attend in 2000 when negotiations broke down with the government of then Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. Now, Pope Francis asked all of us to pray for this apostolic journey so that it may bear hope and unity. Tracy?
All right, Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
And here in the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris and First Lady Jill Biden both hit the road today to push the president's American Rescue Plan. They say the money is needed to keep small businesses and schools open. But opponents say the $1.9 trillion price tag is too much, and schools should have been open a long time ago. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. President Joe Biden's top legislative priority, of course, is the American Rescue Plan, which includes $1,400 direct payments to most Americans. It's passed the House. Now it's in the hands of the Senate. Critics warn a huge chunk of it is unnecessary and that schools can reopen without it.
Fantastic. What are you painting here?
Pushing the American Rescue Plan, including billions for schools, First Lady Jill Biden and new Education Secretary Miguel Cardona visit an elementary school in Connecticut.
One of the things that I was telling Dr. Biden is for students that have disabilities, and students that have needs, sensory needs, having in-person option that's safe is critically important.
In Virginia, Vice President Kamala Harris stopped at a business run by women.
2.5 million women have left the workforce. And we are afraid almost maybe some of them permanently.
And as women especially continue to suffer during the pandemic, words of encouragement.
And we're going to get through this.
Absolutely.
And it's people like you who help us get through this, right?
Yeah, we worked nonstop throughout this entire pandemic.
But it's the price tag on the rescue plan critics warn will bury generations to come.
The vast majority of this multi-trillion-dollar package is a borrowing from our future, robbing future generations, and squandering it today under the guise of countering the economic slowdown.
Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted this morning, 90% of the money is unrelated to COVID. Joel Griffith from the Heritage Foundation also calls the American Rescue Plan a smokescreen. He says in places like Florida, schools have been open 5 days a week.
What you see in places like Chicago and LA and New York is you see the teachers unions have a stranglehold on those city government officials, and they are forcing these schools to be closed. They're saying it's health related. It's not. That is a lie.
Meanwhile, in the Oval Office, President Joe Biden discussing not COVID-19, but cancer, and meeting with lawmakers on how to beat it.
It's probably the one word that is the most frightening word in the English language to people when they hear that C word, cancer.
The president, of course, lost a son to cancer, but he said he believes there's hope. He told reporters and lawmakers in the Oval Office that he'd love to be the president who presides over the end of cancer as we know it. And he said he believes strongly that significant strides can be made against cancer, Alzheimer's, and other diseases going forward. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
President Joe Biden is criticizing states like Texas for easing coronavirus restrictions too soon. He calls it a big mistake, and members of his COVID-19 response team agree.
Stamina has worn thin, fatigue is winning, and the exact measures we have taken to stop the pandemic are now too often being flagrantly ignored.
The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the next 3 months are pivotal. The Biden administration announced health insurance companies are launching a program to get 2 million of the most vulnerable seniors vaccinated as soon as possible. Coming up later in the newscast, analysis of the COVID-19 vaccines from Joseph Meaney, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Tonight, the U.S. House of Representatives is scheduled to vote on H.R. 1, the so-called For the People Act, a bill touted by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as a win for transparency and election integrity. But conservative lawmakers and even pro-life groups say, don't be fooled. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, Democrats just wrapped up a press conference where they talked about why they're rushing H.R. 1 through the Congress, and it's all for election integrity. But Republicans I spoke with say, hold on, it has more to do about politicians than it does about the people. And they add that Democrats will get a real advantage in future elections because it eliminates all the safeguards. Democrats say H.R. 1 is the most significant voting rights and democracy reform in more than a half a century.
We combat big, dark, special interest money in politics and amplify the voice.
Republicans say not so fast.
Well, it's a massive political takeover machine.
Georgia Congressman Jody Hice says H.R. 1 will tip the election scale in favor of Democrats.
It has things like required mandatory universal mail-in ballots for everyone on voter registration files, and we know those files are grossly inaccurate.
The Republican says getting rid of voter ID will create ballot harvesting. He adds restricting states from being involved in their own elections is not the answer. Republicans say our founding fathers knew what they were doing in creating the Electoral College system, so everyone has a voice.
To make sure that places like California and New York, even before they knew there was a California, would one day be populated with lots of people, and they would have the opportunity with their political power to roll right over middle America. And that's why Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want to do this so badly.
Even former Vice President Mike Pence is speaking out. He penned an op-ed calling on Congress to vote against H.R. 1, stating it will increase opportunities for election fraud, trample the First Amendment, and further erode confidence in our elections. Pro-life groups warn the bill could unfairly restrict their communications because it would treat small-dollar donors like lobbyists, limiting their communication with supporters. And by the way, the bill also will be able to make Washington, D.C. to possibly become a state one day. Now, Congressman Heiss tells me that bottom line, it's just another step in the cancel culture movement that they are seeing lately here in Washington, D.C., one that attacks conservatives, people of faith, and makes them second-class citizens. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining us now to talk more about H.R. 1 is John Malcolm, Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. John, welcome back. So good to see you, and thanks for coming on. As Eric mentioned, the Democrats they're really touting this bill, and among the things it seeks to do is to expand early voting and enhance absentee voting. Let's talk a little bit more about that and what you think of those methods to ensure election integrity.
Well, this is a completely unwarranted and unprecedented attempt by the federal government to take over the election process. It's an 800-page bill, chock-a-block with things that really constitutes what I would characterize as a liberal wish list. So it requires same-day registration. So you show up at a polling place, you want to register to vote, before somebody can verify the accuracy of the information you're providing or check to see whether you're an eligible voter. You get to vote. It bans voter ID requirements. It's automatic registration of people to vote through federal and state databases. But for instance, those same officials can't check to see whether you've changed moving addresses and have moved away from a state. It requires people to count out of precinct voters. It mandates vote harvesting. It provides for an automatic re-enfranchisement of convicted felons the moment they're released from prison. As you say, it mandates no-fault absentee balloting, but at the same time, it bans notarization and witness signature requirements. It requires people to count votes up to 10 days after the election, absentee ballots that are received, and there's so much more. It takes away the redistricting process away from state legislators. It reduces the number of federal election commissioners from 6 to 5, which increases the odds that they'll engage in some kind of partisan, investigations. It's astonishing what's in this bill.
John, is there anything in that bill that you like? And also, when it comes to election integrity, what do you think should be done?
Well, there's a lot that should be done in terms of election integrity. Many of them just the opposite of what is in the For the People Act. For instance, I think that there should be voter ID requirements both for in-person voting and for absentee balloting. I think that vote harvesting, or really vote trafficking, if you will, should be banned unless you are an immediate family member of somebody who is sick or infirmed or elderly. State legislatures are taking up a lot of these measures. There is a bill that's close to passage in Iowa and Wyoming and Georgia that are looking into some of these measures. The Heritage Foundation has put out fact sheets, both about problems with H.R. 1 and also things that states legislatures ought to be doing to improve the integrity of our elections. H.R. 1 is the exact wrong way to go. We should be empowering state and local officials to have more secure elections, and certainly we have now.
And John, we have probably about a minute left or so. Ultimately, do you think this bill will pass?
Well, it's certainly going to pass the House. In the Senate, it is evenly divided. I don't think it will pass the Senate, only because the legislative filibuster still exists. I don't think there will be any Democrats who will be prepared to vote. Any Republicans who will be prepared to vote for this bill, and there'll be a lot of pressure put on Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin to nuke, if you will, do away with the legislative filibuster in order to ram through bills like H.R. 1.
All right, John, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. John Malcolm, Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
Coming up, a closer look at the ethical implications of the newly approved Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine, what Catholics need to know, and a spike of cases in one European country. The European Union is set to extend the economic safety net it put in place to help save businesses and jobs from the impact of the coronavirus.
While the months ahead will still be difficult, there are now grounds for cautious optimism.
The EU is extending its plan to allow governments to pour billions of dollars into emergency relief. Countries are starting to do better, but there is concern about the slow rollout of vaccines. Slovakia announces measures to combat the new strain of the coronavirus.
Počet príslušníkov policajného zboru aj spolupráci so zbrojnými silami.
The country's interior minister says police will enforce a national curfew starting tonight. Residents will not be allowed outside between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. Authorities are also tightening rules for international travelers. Slovakia has been one of the hardest hit countries in the European Union. And in Greece, people waited in lines to receive coronavirus tests. Earlier this week, Athens reported its highest daily infection rate in nearly 3 months. Officials also have given nearly 1 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. Well, the Archdiocese of New Orleans has received a lot of attention for urging the faithful to avoid taking the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. But they're not alone. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, as well as a number of dioceses in the United States, are also expressing concern over this newest coronavirus vaccine. In a statement released yesterday, the U.S. Bishops' Conference says in part, quote, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was developed, tested, and is produced with abortion-derived cell lines, raising additional moral concerns. Joining us now is Dr. Joseph Meaney, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Dr. Meaney, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us. As we know, abortion-derived cell lines were used in testing the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, yet there wasn't that much opposition to them. Why is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, why is it different?
Yeah, so several things. First of all, it is completely immersed in these cell lines. So the actual vaccine is produced inside these cell lines. And the other thing, too, is they use two different abortion-derived cell lines. So the HEC-293 line and the PERC-6 line. The latter, which is even worse in some sense because it's the most recently developed abortion-derived cell line. It goes only back to 1995. So, it's definitely the worst ethical profile that a vaccine can have.
And Dr. Meaney, how common is it for abortion-derived cell lines to be used in vaccines or other medications?
So, it changes a bit. I mean, the interesting thing to see is that a lot of vaccines are now produced without the abortion-derived cell lines. However, the HEC-293 line is actually a workhorse. It's the second most commonly used cell line in science today. And so that means that many, many medications, over-the-counter drugs even, have been tested using the HEC-293 line. It's actually quite shocking to see that things like ibuprofen and aspirin and Tylenol will have also been tested with this HEC-293 line.
Well, that's something that probably a lot of people don't even know about. The USCCB, that statement that they made, stopped short of telling the faithful not to take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but only to do so if there are no alternatives. What do you think of their statement, and what would you advise people to do?
Right. So, I mean, the church is very clear that, getting a vaccination is a good thing, but we want to have ethically irreproachable vaccines. So we don't want, and we actually need to demand and protest that we want these vaccines to come out with, using proper cell lines that don't have any connection to abortion. However, that's not the situation we're in now. The problem we have currently is that the only vaccines available are somehow connected to these abortion-derived cell lines. However, you can choose vaccines with a lesser connection, like the Pfizer and the Moderna, and that, of course, is preferable.
Well, Dr. Meaney, we don't have a lot of time left, but before I let you go, do you have any other advice for people when it comes to these vaccines and some who have maybe concerns about them?
Right. So, I mean, it is important to realize that all these vaccines have only emergency use authorization from the FDA. So, they're still experimental in a certain sense, right? And we're hoping that they're going to turn out well, but we do need to be very vigilant and to watch and see, how these vaccines actually perform. One of the interesting things as well is that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has only about a 66% effectiveness compared to the Pfizer and Moderna that have a 95% effectiveness.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for all that information, your analysis. We really appreciate it. Dr. Joseph Meaney, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Thank you again.
Thank you.
The parish church, which is known as the birthplace of the Knights of Columbus, was vandalized over the weekend. Someone broke stained glass windows at St. Mary Church in New Haven, Connecticut. It happened on Saturday morning while people were inside praying. Blessed Michael McGivney, founder of the Knights of Columbus, is entombed at that church. The pastor of the church urged prayers for the person responsible for the destruction. Up next, the power of prayer. Pope Francis explains why the sacrament of reconciliation is the focus of his monthly prayer intention. And the power of God. The Holy Father shares how we can grow in love. New reports say more than 30 protesters were killed in Myanmar, also known as Burma, after security forces cracked down again today. Demonstrators are upset over last month's military coup, which reversed years of progress towards democracy in the Southeast Asian nation. The head of the Diocese of Colombo, Sri Lanka, is weighing in on a government report into the terror attacks on Easter Sunday back in 2019.
The Easter Sunday Commission report has been handed over to us yesterday. We thank the Commission for all the labor they put into this. But we have many question marks about this report.
Cardinal Malcolm Ranjith says the probe does not reveal who funded the strike and who was involved. In 2019, more than 250 people were killed on attacks on several sites, including 2 Catholic churches. Officials blame the attack on groups that pledged alliance to ISIS. Pope Francis prays for a greater desire to experience the sacrament of reconciliation.
Cuando yo voy a confesarme, es para sanarme.
For his March prayer intention, the Holy Father reminds the faithful that confession is to pass from misery to mercy and to heal one's soul. He says sins are not at the center of confession, but rather the divine love we receive from it. Pope Francis also says only through Jesus are we able to believe in God's love for humanity.
Questa porta del mistero dell'amore del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
At the Holy Father's weekly talk in the Vatican, Pope Francis says God's love is given to us through the Holy Trinity. The Pope says Jesus is our human example of how we can experience God's love through a humble prayer. We can meet the Lord. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.